This morning on Locked On Dolphins, I did a show looking at all 31 teams and their tight end rooms to explore who the Dolphins may trade for. About 5 minutes after I hit publish, they traded for Darren Waller. Chris Grier, please, I beg you, don't do that again.
You are Locked On Dolphins, your daily Miami Dolphins podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
All right, Miami, welcome to another Tuesday, July 1st episode of Locked On Dolphins. It is your team every day, sometimes twice a day. I'm your host, Kyle Krabs, lifelong Miami Dolphins fan, host of Locked On Dolphins, co-host of Locked On NFL Scouting, author of Touchdown Miami on Substack, and NFL staff writer for A to Z Sports. Want to give a special welcome and shout out to our everydayers because it is your team every day. We don't just say it, we live it here on the Locked On Network. Today on the show, I threatened Chris Grier for burning my content, and I jinxed it. We got through the end of the show, and we did the premiere. And as I finished recording the final 30 seconds, I said, they haven't done anything. I'm going to get this up before the Dolphins nuke this content and make it irrelevant. And the show is scheduled to premiere. It's pre-recorded. And we're 8 minutes into the premiere. And the Dolphins, it's announced they traded for Darren Waller. And I can't help but look back and laugh a little bit because Darren Waller with the New York Giants. The New York Giants was one of the teams that when we did the exercise this morning, got a lot of attention. This Daniel Bellinger, well, they have Theo Johnson as an athletic player. They got a lot riding on, and Bellinger's been phased out the last couple of years. Last year, a rookie contract. They bring in Greg Dulcich. They draft Thomas Fidone. They got a surplus. Yeah, well, how about the retired guy, Darren Waller? Darren Waller coming to the Dolphins, and the Dolphins spit in my face. So shout out to the football gods. I did not realize we had that power this morning to facilitate. So maybe I'll do a re-racked cornerback episode early tomorrow morning to see if we can get a cornerback signing on Wednesday and do the double dip. That'd be really fun. But Darren Waller coming to the Dolphins, and there's opinions all over the board on this one. I've kind of let it marinate just like we did yesterday with a trade before I did the afternoon show, kind of reacting to all of the details. And there's been no slow leak of announcements of more details with the Darren Waller deal. We do have the trade itself and the compensation. It's a nothing burger for Miami. It is a roll of the dice, really, is what it feels like for Miami, where it is a flex player. Make no mistake about that. Darren Waller is going to be at his best detached from the core. It's a former college wide receiver from Georgia Tech, 6'6". When he came through the combine way back when in 2015, he was 238 pounds. He ran a 4.46. He's got 33 and a quarter inch arm length for wide receivers. That was 85th percentile, but when you filter it through tight ends, it's 62nd percentile. So not a super long player as far as tight ends go, despite being 6'6", but the athletic profile here is going to age very gracefully for a flex tight end, for a 6'6", 240-pound guy. And Darren Waller, obviously, his early career was about being on the practice squad and trying to make it stick as a wide receiver in Baltimore. And then he transitions to tight end and plays his tight ends coach during his two breakout seasons in Oakland and then Las Vegas in 2019 and 2020 was none other than Frank Smith. And there's some really interesting, you can go back. Darren Waller did a podcast with John Gruden in March, and Gruden asked him, he told him he looked great. He says, there ain't chance you're going to come back and play. And Waller was pretty dismissive of it, but he did say there's two guys who would have my ear, I would give my ear to about a comeback. It's you, being John Gruden, and Frank Smith. Well, lo and behold, between Frank Smith and presumably Drew Rosenhaus, Darren Waller kind of got in his ear, hey, you want to come back and play in Miami? Rosenhaus represents Darren Waller. He's signing a one-year contract worth, quote, up to $5 million. But Darren Waller, represented by Drew Rosenhaus. Drew Rosenhaus, of course, also represents Jonnu Smith. So can't help but wonder and be curious about Drew and his influence of player A versus player B and getting player B at a price point that's friendly for what your budget is, considering Jonnu Smith was playing for $4 million this season, 4 and change, a little over 4. And then Jonnu obviously gets the 200% pay raise to go play in Pittsburgh with the Steelers. And these moving parts with agents and reps and different players and their interests. And I think it's a nice little look at some of how the sausage is made from a negotiation standpoint, and reps that have a lot of clients and how they kind of work to find their clients' destinations, and the good ones work with the teams too. And this is an opportunity for a payoff for Darren Waller. My expectations are not particularly high for Darren. He didn't play last year, right? And he got traded for the 100th overall pick in 2023 to go to New York after the seasons that he had in Las Vegas. His age 31 season in 2023, he played in 12 games. He had 74 targets, 52 catches for 552 yards and 1 touchdown. Retired after that. It was kind of a will he, won't he throughout the summertime last year, and then hung him up and announced he was not going to play with the Giants. He would retire. Giants put him on the reserve retired list, which means he had more years left on his contract. They retained his rights. The Dolphins renegotiate a new deal for 1 year up to $5 million for Darren Waller. So roll of the dice hedge. But even I want to caution anybody whose expectations is that Darren Waller is going to come in and be Jonnu Smith because he's an athletic flex. These are very different kinds of players. So we're going to talk a little bit more about that. We're going to talk more about the trade. We're going to talk about what it means for the Dolphins. Get into all. I've sat on it for a couple hours, really let it marinate. We're going to get into all of that next here on Locked On Dolphins. Make sure you guys stick with us. You ever wish managing your money felt easier? With Monarch Money, it can. Whether you're growing your savings or planning a big purchase, Monarch puts you in the driver's seat. It's like having your own personal CFO, giving you full visibility and control over your finances. Monarch Money is more than just a budgeting app. It's a complete financial command center where you can track all your accounts, investments, and spending all in one place. In addition to managing your money, you're also building your wealth. And for me, it's all those micro transactions throughout a month and seeing how they're all laid out and how you can streamline that and be more efficient with your purchases. That has helped me set my path towards a more efficient savings plan. So take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use code LOCKEDONNFL at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first year. That's monarchmoney.com. Promo code LOCKEDONNFL for half off of your first year. The trade compensation. I'm sorry, I cannot get over the timing of how this show played out this morning. The show compensation, the trade compensation. The Dolphins are sending a 2026 sixth round pick that's conditional to New York for Waller's rights, and in return are getting Darren Waller and a 2027 seventh round draft choice. So the draft pick coming back as a part of this conditional pick swap, and we don't know the conditions. Are the conditions it starts as a base 6 and can go up to a 5? Are the conditions that it starts as a base 6 and can go down to a 7? Are there conditions where, if Waller doesn't make the team, we don't know about the guarantees of the contract yet? And that's where the next series of talking points is going to come out. Is, do you find out the conditions on the pick that Miami sent? And then also, what is the contract structure for guaranteed salary, for base salary, for bonus structure, for incentive money? What is likely to be earned? I would imagine because he didn't play last year, it would all technically be classified as not likely to be earned incentive money. but do you put multiple layers on it? Is it you have to play 50+% of snaps and pass over a production threshold? Is it you have to play over X number of snaps and the Dolphins have to make the postseason? There's all these different kinds of ways that you can kind of, I don't want to say funny money, but you can finesse incentives to put the layers on it. And really at the cost, I don't want to say it's a nothing burger for Miami, but in the grand scheme of investment opportunities that you had, I think Waller is a nice bet to place, but it's a nice bet to place that's not really you're not going to wake up tomorrow morning and have buyer's remorse about Darren Waller. Now, there might be opportunity cost that you feel less good about. There may be another player that becomes available that you think has more of a long-term runway, right? And that's the thing with Darren is he's obviously retired last year. There's been some medical stuff. He's going to turn 33 on September 13th. So the longevity here, this is a short-term answer, but it's a cost-controlled answer with some ceiling and a guy who should be as healthy as he's been in a while based off his recovery. Now, realistically, what can you expect to get? I think that's where you hear a lot of the cynicism from Dolphins fans around this move is, well, Darren Waller had a down year in New York and didn't play last year. So how high are you willing to get your hopes versus the guy who caught 107 balls for 1,200 yards and 9 touchdowns in 2020? Right. And I think if that's your expectation, and it feels like that's everybody's got an opinion, right? And a lot of the pundits and football media personalities that they're seeing this move and they're kind of chuckling to themselves as far as like what the Dolphins are expecting. I don't think the Dolphins are expecting 2020 Darren Waller. I don't think the Dolphins are expecting 2021 Darren Waller. What he caught 55 for 655 and 2 touchdowns. But I think the ideological changes that you're going to see with this offense, there's some clues in who Darren Waller is as a player. So Darren Waller is more Mike Gesicki than he is Jonnu Smith. Now, I don't think that he's Mike Gesicki. I think he's, or at least the healthy version of Darren Waller, is more physical at the catch point. I think he's a more fluid player at the catch point with body adjustments. I think his former wide receiver background is pretty evident. I think Mike's a stiffer player. But it's going back to that version of a flex tight end as compared to the Jonnu Smith underneath manufactured touch ball underneath. This is an actual big slot where Jonnu, I think, was more wing and flex. I might be aging myself. I don't know. Remember Chris Cooley, number 47 in Washington in like the early 2010s? Like that's kind of what I felt Jonnu Smith was. Like where he was at his best was some of those similar ways. Where this is, those of you who wanted Kyle Pitts, this is Kyle Pitts at home. Right? This is, hey, it's not going to cost you a second or third round draft choice and $10 million this year. It's half the budget. You might get half the payout, but you could get more than half the payout. And I would argue Waller at his best a couple years ago was better than we've seen from Kyle Pitts. Other than Kyle Pitts' rookie season under Arthur Smith. And of course, Arthur Smith has gobbled up a tight end in acquiring Jonnu Smith via trade. So, I think this is a power slot, big-bodied player. Obviously, much taller than Jonnu Smith as well. Where Waller at 6'6". This is a towering presence in the red zone. Where Jonnu is 6'3". It's a big receiver, but it's not 6'6". And Darren Waller's longer than Jonnu Smith. So Jonnu is a little bit more compact, condensed. I think he's more explosive at this stage of the game. That's probably a safe assumption to make But Waller being, if you're just looking for sit routes and zone busters and stuff underneath, and then you want a red zone target and a big body guy that you can put it up above the rim and do some of the Mike Gesicki Tua type things from 2022, I think this is a little bit more of that style of player. Will it work? Will Waller make the roster? What's he guaranteed? Like, we still don't know all of these things. But it's my objective on these shows to not sit here and tell you definitively this is going to work or that's going to work or this is not going to work or this is a disaster. It's what are they trying to do? What are they trying to achieve? What are the clues of what breadcrumbs might be here and how does it all fit together? What are they? How would it all fit together? Because I'll be honest, my expectations for late stage career, fresh off retirement, Darren Waller are pretty low. But Tyler DeSena had a nice thought on this whole exchange. I don't want to finish with that. We're going to get into that next. Here, Locked on Dolphins. Make sure you guys stick with us. So Tyler DeSena does great job on social media if you don't follow him. But he had a thought thesis on Jonnu Smith and how he's more receiver than blocker and the limitations that put in on the run game. And look, Darren Waller is not going to solve any of that either, right? Like if you're expecting Darren Waller to come in and play inline and play on the front side of run formations and be an inline block, that ain't his game either. Let's be abundantly clear. But the appeal of Jonnu Smith was the surplus value that you got. And I think those who point out some of the fundamental flaws in the offense, and Tyler did this in his video about they used Jonnu Smith in the screen game as a replacement for the run game because the run game was fundamentally broken last year, right? Getting away from that and taking some of the receiving flex receiver upside of a player like this and getting it in Darren Waller, if it works, and putting it with Nick Westbrook-Ikine as a wide receiver, and putting it with Pharaoh Brown as the new wide tight end infusion to compete with Julian Hill. The renewed emphasis on the interior offensive line, the more physical backs in the backfield to be able to earn hard yards between the tackles. All of it says, hey, we still want that big-bodied, middle-of-the-field receiving profile, but we're not going to masquerade around as a 12 personnel team that plays like a heavy 12 personnel team. When the Dolphins played 12, they were a finesse 12. And I think that's part of the problem is you're going to put two tight ends on the field, but your wide tight end last year, whether it was Durham or Julian, was irregular and inconsistent with their execution. And then Jonnu, you had to put away from the formational strength because you could not trust him to win frontside blocks. So now if the Dolphins want to be a 12, they could say, well, we could be a big passing 12, but we can also run downhill at you in theory. Or we can be a 21 team with two running backs on the field, and we could have the passing threat of Achane, and we can still run with physicality inside. And if our tight end is our inline guy, we can really blur the lines with run tendencies and pass tendencies. And I felt that was a great point by Tyler that he made as far as the Jonnu Smith presence. If he was the only tight end on the field, they very rarely called run plays. I did this study on Touchdown Miami, and most of the runs that went for gains were quarterback runs that were scrambles on pass plays. So I don't think Darren Waller helps you make that go away because he's the same kind of player. But I think it makes you more likely to be an 11 personnel team that if you want to play 12, you're not trying to hide your intentions. And if you are trying to hide your intentions, the other parts of the offense should be better suited to run the ball and make that second tight end, that formation adjuster, not be such a critical player that you have to work around because the other pieces can win their individual matchups more frequently. That's the theory of it. If it doesn't work, we're going to be in for another painstaking problem-solving fall as far as Miami Dolphins offensive football. And if that comes to pass, this organization is aligned to make whatever necessary changes they need to make to get aligned for people they feel good about to be at the forefront of the next decision-making process in the next team-building cycle. But I see all the moves, and it really feels like the general football community, if you're not in the weeds with this team, I mean, shoot, we got former players on shows that didn't even realize Jalen Ramsey had requested a trade. It had been news since the second week of April, right? So if you're not in the weeds with this team, I think they just see the names, right? Teron Armstead retired. They traded Jalen Ramsey. Calais Campbell moved on. Now they're signing Darren Waller. Guy was retired last year. What are the Dolphins doing? I promise you, there's ways that you could tie it all together where this is all logical football operations. Now, it might not be optimized premier investments, but I can see how these pieces fit together. And the nice thing is, I think between the interior offensive line renewment, the running backs that they added for some short yardage stuff, the new wide tight end that they brought in for some competition amongst the Y, the presence of Nick Westbrook-Ikine, I look at the offensive side of the ball and I say, hey, I actually think we're a little bit more diverse in what we can do, even if you have a question mark with Darren Waller at tight end, and you have a question mark for the receiving profile of your wide tight end. There's like 3 wide tight ends that you feel good about in that regard. And they're all really well compensated at this stage of the game, with the exception of like Sam Laporta. TJ Hawkinson's well compensated, right? Mark Andrews is well compensated. George Kittle, Trey McBride. I've already proved myself wrong. I named more than 3. But that's the challenge, is those guys don't grow on trees. So how do you platoon a room otherwise? And this, to me, for the cost of up to $5 million in incentive money and a conditional 6th-round draft choice, when you get a 7th-round draft choice back, is a much more attractive option than just saying, we got Tanner Connor, we're good to go, right? So I think the opportunity cost is very low. I think the risk for Miami is very low. I'm assuming there's a lot of incentivized dollars here. I'm fascinated to find out the guarantees. I'm fascinated to find out the conditions on the terms of the pick. So those are the things that are going to tilt me really far one way on the spectrum or another. But at least now we know the Dolphins' succession plan was they were going to move on from Jonnu Smith and Jalen Ramsey, and they were going to get back Darren Waller and Minkah Fitzpatrick with a 5th-round draft choice in their back pocket and a conditional 6 going out, but a 7th coming back, and they lost the 7th with the trade for Jonnu and that part of the package. So neutral draft picks coming in and out, actually technically upgrading some of those assets a little bit. You get younger and in a different room in the defensive backfield. You make a pivot to a player who you're not going to presumably feature. Look, if Darren Waller gets 145 targets like he did in 2020, something went terribly wrong. Let's just be honest. Something went terribly wrong this year. But if you told me he had 45 catches on 60 targets and he had, 500 yards, 450, average 10 to 11 and a half yards a catch, a couple touchdowns, I think we live with that. And I think there'd be some opportunities where there'd be some opportunity to catch some passes for Darren Waller. And there should be space, right? Because that's the thing about the receivers that they have. You should have space. And it's what you do with it. That's going to do it for us here on Locked On Dolphins, 2nd episode of the day. We'll see how quickly the Dolphins turn around and make this one irrelevant as well. My phone's buzzing. We'll see. Okay, it's just a push notification. That's going to do it. I'm getting out of here. Cock Grabs. Keep it locked in. Right here, Locked On Dolphins, your team every day. I'll talk to you all again soon.